Good day, everyone. Welcome to the first day of the keynote lectures of the first Philippine-Korea Youth Forum with the theme Borderless Collaboration and Exchange. PKYF is organized by UP Arang, co-presented by UP Korean Research Center and Pinoy Scholars sa Korea, made possible by APOP and JK Network Services. In partnership with Animo, Anyong PNU, and UP Uyong Muyo, in cooperation with Luhang Society and FU International Studies Society. Also brought to you by Korean Cultural Center, also brought to you by Ateneo Celadon and co-promoted by Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines. I am Adarna from UP area and I will be your host for today. So this session is live on Facebook and on YouTube. So today's session will be under the Arts and Media track, and we will be learning not just one, but two keynote lectures from our invited speakers. Feel free to drop in your questions on the comments anytime during the lectures, and we will be answering those on the open forum later on. So for everyone who is streaming this and would like to share it on your social media accounts, please use the hashtag PKYF2021 and hashtag transcending borders. Also, don't forget to tag UP Ariang social media account. So now for our first speaker, she obtained her doctoral degree in political science from Yonsei University, Seoul in 2016, and her master's degree in Korean studies in 2012 from the same university. Prior to that, she studied at the Asian Center, UP Diliman, with Korea as her country of specialization. She is also a current associate professor at the Asian Center, UPD. Her research interests include Korea studies, ASEAN-Korea relations, Filipinos in Korea, and environmental politics. To talk about the appeal of Korean culture to Filipinos and what we can learn about it, with her lecture entitled Korean Wave, What's in It for Us, let's all welcome Dr. Michelle Palumbarit.
Thank you very much, Adarna. That's a very nice introduction. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to talk about Korean Wave or Hallyu. What's in it for us? It's truly a great opportunity for me to share with you what and how I understand Korean Wave or the so-called Hallyu. I'm very sure you are absolutely familiar with this term. Okay, so I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. And I'm excited to hear your observations, comments, and insights later. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is, in this brief lecture, is to address these questions. Next slide, please. So what is Hallyu? What made Hallyu a global success? Why is Hallyu attractive to many? And what can we get out of it? Okay, so let's get started. The story of Hallyu is pretty much the story of Korea's economic development. That is, from a country ravaged by the Korean War in the 1950s, particularly from 1951 to 1953, to one of the most industrialized countries in the world today. Hallyu too started from basically struggling film and music industries in the 1960s and 70s to what it is now. You guess it right, a global success. So, what is Hallyu? Korea.net defines Hallyu as the global craze for Korean culture, ranging from music, TV dramas, movies to Korean cuisine. So it basically started in 1997 when the China Central Television Station, or the CCTV, aired a Korean drama entitled What is Love? It became a big hit in China. So in 2003, a Korean drama, Winter Sonata, was aired in Japan. And like in China, it too became a big hit in Japan. This led many Chinese and Japanese to go to Korea with the primary purpose of visiting the locations where the dramas they watched were filmed. So in the realm of music, it was Soteji and the Boys that paved the way for the globally popular boy and girl groups to which I know you know very well. But the success and global popularity of K-pop or Hallyu, or Korean wave, did not just happen overnight. As you know, and as I mentioned a while ago, Korea was a war-torn country in the 1950s. And so the goal of the president then really was twofold. The first one is to recover from the economic devastation and to avoid being occupied by communism again, just north of its border and by its very own brother, North Korea. So thus culture industries such as music and films were also affected. So when Park Chung-hee took over the government through a coup d'etat in 1961 and throughout his authoritarian regime until 1971, when he was assassinated, he exerted strong control over the media and the film and music industries as well. I can say that, and some scholars say that he had a culturally restrictive policy. Music and films that were anti-government were banned. He preferred those with anti-communism and patriotic and nationalist sentiments. Okay, so next slide, please. So, nevertheless, it was during his term in 1973 that he founded the Korean Motion Picture Promotion Corporation, or later on the KFC, the Korean Film Council, that is very crucial to the success of K-pop, which I will be telling you later. It was not until 1994, after the authoritarian regimes of Park Chung-hee and Chon Doo-won, that culture industry of Korea started to flourish. So, what prompted the Korean government to take notice of the importance of culture industry? So there are two important reasons here. One, the Korean movie, the Korean film Sopyeonji, which was a big hit in 1993 in Korea. Why was this film a big hit in Korea? To quote him, it was during this time when people were beginning to pay attention to leisure, culture, and self as a result of decades of focus primarily on industrialization during the Park Chung-hee regime. And so it was during this time that the Korean people started to reflect on their culture and on themselves. The second one is the success of the Jurassic Park. It is said that the revenues of this movie were worth the foreign sales of 1.5 million units of Hyundai cars. Okay, the Korean pride, of course. So, against this backdrop, that in 1994, within the Ministry of Culture and Sports, the Cultural Industry Bureau was established. And interestingly, in 1999, President Kim Dae-jung, who called himself and prided himself to be the president of culture, allocated about 1% of the total government budget, amounted to 148.5 million US dollars. And the current president, too, President Moon Jae-in, who also realized the great importance of cultural industries, supports Hallyu. In fact, in 2020, he established the Hallyu Support and Cooperation Division under the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism to support Hallyu abroad. Okay. So in his speech at the Seoul Arts Center in 2020, he said, to quote, next slide, please. Our culture and arts bring honor to Korea and make a proud country, the president added, saying K-dramas like Descendants of the Sun and Hallyu stars like the K-pop supergroup BTS are among the main topics of conversation at his summits with foreign leaders. When going abroad or holding talks with foreign leaders, I feel very proud, he said, adding cultural freedom will be ensured as much as possible, and people in culture and the arts will receive assistance to secure their livelihoods and have their welfare guaranteed to the maximum level. So we can see here that for President Moon, K-pop to him is not merely a socio-economic opportunity, but also an opportunity to improve and enhance Korea's diplomatic relations abroad. Next slide, please. So you see here, from Winter Sonata, next slide, please, to Daejanggong, to Sotaeji and the Boys, okay? Korea has produced popular groups such as, I know you're very much familiar with, the Big Bang, Girls' Generation, BTS, and EXO. I know you know these groups very well. Okay, so what makes Hallyu a huge success, a global success? So I told you before, Hallyu did not just happen overnight. Okay, it's, I contend, a combination of many factors that make Hallyu what it is now. Next slide, please. The first one that I can say that contributes to the success of Hallyu is the screen quota for local films. So for Korea, in order to protect the domestic film industry in 1967, or from 1967 until 2006, the Korean government required that domestic films be shown on each screen at least 146 days per year. But this changed under the pressure from the US government in 2006, that required number of days was reduced to 73. Okay. Another reason is the strong support from the government of Kim Dae-jung, Lim Yong-pak, and the current president Moon Jae-in, as I mentioned a while ago. Okay, next slide, please. Also, another reason is that there are many universities that offer film studies programs in Korea. Um, Currently, to my knowledge, there are 55 colleges and universities that offer major programs in theater and film studies. For example, Hongik University, university famous for arts, offers film and digital media. Songkyungwan University offers film, television, and multimedia. Yonsei University offers masters in fine arts. So what does this mean? It means that these universities offer a pool of human resources in the field. Another reason is the strong support for local films. I mentioned KFC a while ago, or the Korean Film Council. This is an organization under the Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism that promotes Korean film production. Okay, so it supports and provides funds for Korean films. Also, speaking about support, there is a local support for Korean films. In a study by Shin, he mentioned that on average, two domestic films were viewed per person in Korea. Okay, next slide, please. Another reason is the aggressive marketing and social media technology of music entrepreneurs or talent agencies. I know you're familiar with SM Entertainment and YG Entertainment. Okay, so these agencies, these entrepreneurs really aggressively market this Hallyu through their training and marketing strategies. Okay, and another reason is, according to a scholar, Shim, the hybridization strategy. This means that Koreans have provided their own twist to the foreign styles and forms by blending and adding their indigenous characteristics and unique flourishes in innovative ways. Simply, it successfully combines Asian and Western elements in their style. Another reason here is the global outlook for Korea's cultural industries. So these entrepreneurs, okay, the Jebels and the Korean government do not just look Korea as a market. Instead, they go beyond Korea. And I can say that this is very much reflective of Korea's export-oriented strategy since Korea's industrialization efforts in 1960s. So, in line with this, the Korean government established Korea Cultural Centers, which we have here in the Philippines. Next slide, please. To date, there are 32 KCCs in 27 countries all over the world. Okay, so what makes Hallyu attractive to many? And that includes us, Filipinos. Next slide, please. Okay, so truly, Hallyu's popularity is global. There is no question about that. Hallyu in the Philippines is no exception. So many of you can affirm this. And there are Filipinos who are not satisfied with just watching K-dramas, movies, and concerts of K-pop stars here in the Philippines. So instead, they opt to go and see for themselves Korea in person. And this is reflected in the statistics. As you can see here in the table, in 2010, there were about 297,000 Filipinos who visited Korea. But in succeeding years, in 2015, 2017, 2018 to 2019, the number increased. So such that in 2019, there were 504,000 Filipinos who visited Korea. But in 2020, of course, due to the pandemic, there were only 106,000 Filipinos who visited Korea. But I'm sure that after everything normalizes, the number will continue to increase. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so K-pop's popularity has really become global, and in the Philippines, the K-pop stars are brought here. Okay, they have become endorsers of our big products here in the country. Just for example, in Lee Min Ho for Bench and Lee Min Ho too for Lazada, alongside Catherine Bernardo. Next slide, please. And also Hyunbin. If you want to take Hyunbin home with you, have that pillow or poster or tabletop. Okay. And Hyunbin, next slide, please, is not alone. He is with his co-star in Choi, Hejin, who became endorsers of Smart here in the Philippines. Okay, next slide, please. So what makes Hallyu really attractive? So scholars agree on this. First, the complete package. Korean music has catchy tunes, attractive bodies. The performers have attractive bodies. They wear cool clothes, and they have other attractive attributes such as they're gentle and very polite when they speak. Another one is cultural proximity with Asians. To quote Shima cited in Chon, it's the ability to touch the right chord of Asian sentiments, which is family values. You can see this in Korean films and dramas. They value family so much. And there's also this interesting twist or unpredictable movie endings, and shall I say, fast-paced in their TV dramas and films as well. And also, the music gives off positive vibes, inspiration, and hope to its audience. Next slide, please. And so we are inspired by K-pop, such that we also ventured on our own, and we have this P-pop version, right? So example, we have the BGYO, next slide please, and we have also SB19 or SB19, okay? So these groups underwent rigorous training in Korea. And obviously we can see the influence of K-pop in them. Um, the way they dress and the way they look, right? But at the end of the day, the question really is, what's in it for us? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Um, we are impressed. We are happy with K-pop's performance. We are satisfied with their performances. We buy the products they endorse. We're happy with them. But again, I think that at the end of the day, what can we get out of this? Okay. Um, for me, I think that we have to realize the importance of culture industry as well. We have a rich culture, we have a rich history, we have rich traditions, and this can be turned into opportunities. But turning this into opportunities need investment in research and development in order to produce products, cultural products that have high quality. And again, it is also a collaborative effort between the government, the business, and the people as well. So in Korea, they really support their own products, their films, and I hope too that in the Philippines we do that in the future. Because I am positive that if we do this and we try to learn from Korea, because Korean Hallyu learns from Hollywood, they say, and if we learn from this, I'm positive that we have our own market out there. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for your comments and insights as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palumbarit, for that insightful talk. We learned about Hallyu, how it started before it became the Hallyu that we know now, its factors that made it big, especially here in the Philippines, and what's in for us Filipinos. So again, guys, to everyone who's watching, feel free to drop in your questions in the comments anytime during the lectures, and we will be answering those during the Q&A later on. But before we move on, we would like to invite everyone to KCCAT 7 Uya Flick that will be held on May 1, 2021. KCCAT is an annual quiz contest held by UP Uyamuyo, which aims to promote and develop understanding about South Korean popular culture through lively, interesting, and healthy intellectual competition among the participants. So for more information, you can visit UP Uyumuya's Facebook page. Now, before we move on to our first speaker, can we watch the video from UPKRC? Okay, now moving on to our next keynote speaker. She is a freelance language instructor and has been teaching Filipino as a foreign language at the ASB&CBN Star Magic Workshop since 2016. She previously worked at the Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines and as the founding chair of the Korean Drama Society in the Philippines. She has presented several papers on Korean film and drama at international conferences, the latest being the 7th World Congress for Hallyu held in Israel in 2019. Let's all listen to Ms. Helweena Sadorra with her lecture on analyzing Korean and Filipino representations in entertainment media and their implications.
Hi everyone, magandang hapon. Annyeonghaseyo. And good afternoon or good evening, good morning to anybody watching across the world if ever you're in different locations. Thank you, by the way, to UP Arirang and PKYF for the opportunity to be here, to be invited. By the way, it's my first time in StreamYard, so bear with me when trying to share and do some technical adjustments. Okay. And by the way, before I start, maybe thank you pala, Ma'am Michelle. Professor Palumbarit really had gave us a good foundation on at least knowledge on a good knowledge on Hallyu. We may read it across the net, many references, but what she has emphasized so far is a good discussion point for today. Okay. Oops. This one, 8 lang. Anyway, let me go back to my slide there. There, finally. Okay. Before I continue, this may be a very unusual way to start a presentation, but um, uh, we are all here, of course, sharing about culture and knowledge, but at the same time, we are in the middle of pandemic. So if you can allow me for at least a 30-second um, allotment for a short prayer for all of us in the middle of this pandemic. I hope that's okay for the organizers and the listeners. Uh, yeah, let me offer this prayer for us, for this country, and even for those that are in Korea. Father, thank you, Lord, for Lord, you are a God who heals, a God, Lord, who performs miracles even up to this day. We may be of different faiths, Lord, by watching this, um, Lord, program, but thank you because, God, you are concerned about our lives. And I pray even at this time to those who are watching who may be connected to somebody who is affected by COVID. Lord, we pray for your rescue. We pray for your healing. We pray even for hope, Lord, and strength, further strength, and further, Lord, just, Lord, the capacity to further dream and not just study, just so we can go by every day for the students that are watching here, but also, God, to find that inner hope, Lord, to live and fight, Lord, even during this pandemic. Thank you because you are with us in Jesus' name. Amen. So there you go. Let me go. Thank you for allowing me to do that. I was just really prompted to offer that short prayer. Anyway, we are here to discuss about Hallyu in general, and also, at least in my case, representations that we can find in both Korean and Filipino TV series and films. Uh, by the way, before we go into the content, let me share with you that this paper is actually, or at least this study, has been a continuing preliminary study. And it's not really something that is very conclusive. However, thank you for allowing me to share at least these insights and data, at least so we can find some ways to discuss this further and probably expand it, because this is a very also large topic. I started writing about this and or researching about this when I presented in 2014 a paper in Ateneo entitled "Starring Copinos from Quest of the Korean Dream to the Making of a Hero." This is a presentation on Korean films as commentary to Philippine life and issues through looking into the Kopinos, or the Korean Filipino children in Korean films. And also 2 years ago, I was able to share the first portion, at least the first half of this topic that we're discussing now, which is analyzing Filipino representation only in Korean dramas and films and their implications. But uh, for today, we are expanding that a bit. So instead of just Filipinos and Philippines represented in Korean dramas and Korean films, we're also including Korean representations in Filipino teleseries and Filipino films so far. So again, this is still a preliminary study. And also, I would like to acknowledge from UP Korea Research Center a presentation which is very related to this also, media representations of Filipinos in Korea. This was presented in the 6th Philippine Korean Studies Symposium. By the way, the 7th is coming up soon, so I hope uh, we can also take part in this symposium. But these representations of Filipinos in Korean, of Koreans in the Philippines, and their policy implications are more in the news, okay, in the broadcast, not really in the entertainment media. So at least in this presentation, we're looking at films and TV dramas. Again, this may be a preliminary study, but I'm very thankful to those who helped me so far in gathering some information that are very relevant to this, and create and researching lang some clips and news. Thank you to Jong Heju and Joanne Felonia, and even to Hiwon Beck. I promise to acknowledge them at least in this presentation. Happy birthday, Hiwon. She's all the way there in Korea. She's been helping me in researching more about the reactions of Koreans to Filipino representations in Korea. Okay, we'll be approaching at least this study through The Circuit of Culture by Duguay and Stuart Hall in 1997. This is a theory or framework used in cultural studies in analyzing cultural artifacts. In this case, we are analyzing television dramas and films. Uh, we are at least no we as we are presenting this, we are not just listing what's good and bad about what we see in representations, but we're also into the question of meaning, which arises in relation to all the different moments or practices in our cultural circuit here in this at least framework, in the construction of identity and in the marking of difference in production and consumption, as well as in the regulation of social conduct, as Stuart Hall said in his book about this. We are looking at a cultural space where this production and these moments and practices, the representation, identity, production, consumption, regulation, are interconnected, and each moment or practice or area that we look into would be helpful into analyzing these at least representations that we see. Here's our discussion flow for today. We'll contextualize a bit on the increasing visibility of Philippine and Korean images in the entertainment media. Then we go to the lists of. By the way, this is not, of course, I've tried together with those who assisted me to be as extensive as we can, but at least with presenting this to you, maybe you also would be more conscious of what you've been consuming and watching, and watch out for more of those representations that you might notice further in other films and dramas that are not represented here. So presenting that list as the second part, and then we analyze based on the framework that was given a while ago, and we conclude hoping for improvement in the situation at least of that we find in these representations. Okay, first, contextualization, increasing visibility of Philippine and Korean images in entertainment media. Okay, so we might wonder when what was the first movie, at least, or drama that showed about Korea, uh, at least in the documented films. There were three in 1950s that showed Filipino heroism at the Korean War. One of them, entitled Korea, was even written by none other than former Senator Benigno Aquino Sr., who of course also worked, for those of you are aware, who worked also as a journalist before in the Korean War. Okay, and so the other films also represented here. Since we are discussing the representations from 2010 to 2020, I'm just dropping here some earlier references also to Korea or Korean in Philippine TV, which of course we would attribute to the Pambansang Krung Krung, as we would call her, Sandara Park, who won in Pinoy Big Brother reality show, and after which has gained success in movies and at least dramas that she starred in, just like Can This Be Love, Because of You, and even Cristala. Also, I'm not sure who our audience might be largely young of age, and at least no yung demographics natin, but I'm sure that some of you might, at least in the older generation, might recognize also that once upon a time in late 1980s to early 1990s, there was this host, Inday Badiday, in her show Eye to Eye. She would normally close her spiel with, I hope you could hear this clip. Yes, I'm not sure if you heard that part, Sarangham ni Dabo. Actually, when I was young, I thought that was Sarangham ni Dapo. But actually, it was Sarangham ni Dabo, referring to a person very dear to her partner. And she would say this in national TV without at least majority of the Filipinos recognizing Sarang Hamnida. Unlike today, that everyone would know Saranghe, almost everyone would recognize Saranghe and Sarang Hamnida already. But back then, we didn't think that it was even Korean. Not many would think it was even a Korean phrase. Also, in 2004, we also that was the height also of the Mexican novela, or at least not hindi naman height, but that period, marami pang Mexican novela that are being shown in on Philippine TV, and some would think that this song that we've been hearing, or this dance beat that we've been hearing on TV and radio programs would be attributed to Mexicans, but actually, or Spanish, but actually it was from the adaptation of this song was from a Korean performer, Mina. Let us listen to this. This is by Roxanne Barcelo. Yeah, that's Chonwa Pado, which is Answer the Phone in English as it was adapted, and it was recorded by and released by Universal Records. So this is to show that um, the rise, at least, of the popularity of Hallyu, yes, came probably in early 2000s, but before that there were already some references on TV that we can see that are, or even in films, as far back as 1950s, regarding the relationship, at least, that we have as a nation and as people to people with Korea. Um, we're all aware that there's so many dramas that have been aired already on Philippine TV since 2003, and now even in Netflix, yung mga top 10 most watched in the Philippines always include Korean dramas or films. However, at least we'll go further up with saying that we did not stop with just watching Korean dramas, but also we also have a lot of Korean drama remakes by now, already 18, the last, which is being shown, has it started, I'm not really sure, but it has been promoted, Encounter. uh, that's the recent one, and with the Sentence of the Sun also gaining recognition in Korean awards, drama awards, which later we will mention. Also, we have already two film remakes, Miss Granny and Miracle in Cell Number 7, which was uh, accepted very well, no, in the Philippines. And also, upcoming, which was announced, but we don't know when this will be released, My Sassy Girl remake and Spellbound remake. Okay, we don't know if they will be pushing through, but at least they were in the news for the time being. Okay. Miss Professor Michelle also mentioned already about K-pop inspired groups. Just yesterday, or the other day before, the day before yesterday, one of my students, and I work in ABS-CBN and Star Magic workshops, and one of my former students, AC Bonifacio, released her cover of Pretty Savage of Blackpink. Um, she has been covering a lot also, and these are P-pop groups, but we know that a lot of them are beyond this even photo. A lot of covers have been posted online, and a lot of inspiration and even training has been attributed to Korea. So we've seen this on TV. Also, we have seen documentaries, the Hallyu and I, some shows like I Can See Your Voice, and the recent by ABS-CBN, which is Aja Aja Tayo, a show in Jeju by Filipino young stars. Okay. So, by the way, they include a Korean pala there. Okay. One Korean and three Filipinos. Also, we have in at least in so we're looking at both ways here, Korea and Philippines. So there are also Philippine representations, or at least references, or appearances or influences that are in Korean media. And one of these very popular is the song Anak. Okay, back in 1979, there's this. It has actually, Freddie Aguilar won an award for Anak in a Korean music festival, if I'm not mistaken. And uh, uh, singer Jong Yun Son made a Korean or performed a Korean adaptation of this song, which we can listen to quickly. Yeah, there. So when you go to Korea, actually, and you visit a norebang, or what they call their videoke, their version of videoke, you can find this in almost all, if not all, videokes. And a lot of Koreans until now are familiar with the song. They say that they're being touched with the lyrics of this song. So, okay. Also, in 2005, there's this movie, You Are My Sunshine, where a portion or a scene was shown where there's a banner showing Mary, Vietnamese or Filipino girls. It's in a rural area. And some dialogue saying that, oh, some friends went to the Philippines to find some spouses. Or maybe this lead also is trying to think, oh, maybe I can go to the Philippines to get married also. In 2008, there's also these two films, Tropical Manila and Romantic Island, which were which used the uh, Philippines as a location for the, and of course as a backdrop to their traveling and staying in the Philippines. So since they are before 2010, I'm showing this as an earlier reference. And in reality shows, Charisse Pempenko, back then, okay, and also Manny Pacquiao appeared in Infinite Challenge and some other. Until now, some Filipinos have been joining some reality shows, okay, in Korea. Some Filipino celebrities have won this I mentioned a while ago in Seoul International Drama Awards. Not just this, actually there are several pa. Don't have time to really go through all of them, but these are some stars who were recognized in the Seoul International Drama Awards. And there are some Korean Filipino film collaboration already. Sunshine Family. This has been screened last year. And directors and producers are uh, mainly Korean, but the cast are mainly Filipinos. Okay, so we go now to the list of the Korean and Philippine production. I won't really go into detail. It's better, I guess, to go into the analysis more, no. But I'll just pick every now and then some of these Korean or Philippine productions to highlight representations from the counterpart country and which recurring roles and themes can we identify from them. Okay, this is a collage of the Korean references in Filipino dramas and films. So, by the way, for your reference, so hindi tayo malilito, we won't be confused. I tried to put an icon. If we're saying these are aired or screened in the Philippines, then you will find a Philippine flag icon there. And if it's in Korea, then that's a Korean icon. Okay, so here's the list. One of those that got really popular, at least a comedy film, okay, in film, is Kimidora, which had three uh, by three seasons, no? Si yung Kambal sa Keme, the first one in 2009, and then the part 2, which is Temple of Keme in 2012, and 2013, the Keming prequel. So all of them had Korean references. Why? Because the patriarch, the father of Kimidora, is actually a Korean. So we see that in 2012 more, in 2013, where Korea was used as a film location, and a lot of references were made into Korean artifacts, Korean culture, and even Korean values. Okay, you have there Ryan. Actually, it's in the Philippines. It's more of we'll discuss this also later. No, that there are more Korean based at least Korean celebrity based, yun. For example, Ryan Bang Sandara Park, roles that we will find in our films and drama. So since they are more recognized, they're always the ones performing these roles. uh, at least for Ryan Bang, since he's identified as a comedian, So most of his roles are also comedic in nature. I did not include those that he appeared in, but he was not identified as a Korean. So there are some few that he's just a normal person, not really identified as a Korean person. Okay. My X and Y's is one of those that also got really popular because of the at least the celebrity couple Liza Soberano and Enrique Hill. Uh, for those who have not watched it, Korea was used as a film location. They went there to find the fiance of again Ryan Bang, which was the friend of. He was performing a role of being a friend to Liza in that movie. They had to for some because of a conflict they had to find the fiance who who's back in Korea and for the wedding to push through between Ryan Bang's character and that fiance. Uh, there's more. Ryan Bang performed also as a half Korean child or as a Korean landowner in Seven Sundays. In Fantastica, we would also find him as in a character of Kang Nam. Funny uh, names din no, that were used for him. And in Kusina Kings in 2018, he was a Korean sponsor of a cooking competition. Here he was a villain in this movie. Okay, in Filipino teleserye, these are not all. I'm sure there are more representations, but these are the ones that at least I have found direct images or more recurring images of Koreans in these teleseries. Okay, one is from Vampire Ang Daddy Ko. Um, Jinko Oda performed there as a mom to a Korean daughter. Okay, and they were even wearing hanbok in that show. That's as early as 2013. 2016, Dasori Choi, also one of those that have been popular from a reality show in GMA 7. She performed an exchange student in one of the episodes of Pepito Manaloto. One of the also popular ones that we've heard of is My Korean Chagya, where the male lead of Heart Evangelista is a Korean celebrity. A portion of Tadhana. This is actually sort of parang ano ba to? Mga every episode it's featuring OFW stories. So one of them is about this Filipina who was married to a Korean, but actually there were conflicts with the family. So that's my Korean fairy tale. Sana Dalawa ang Puso Ko. It's a rather uh, a drama where Ryan Bang also performed as a Korean, but there he was portrayed as a poor Korean guy adopted into a Filipino family. And in 2018, Dasuri Joy again was seen as a Korean investor in Die Will Always Love You. Uh, Recurring Korean roles and themes in Filipino films and drama. So we see there were exchange students, short-term education by Koreans coming here to study, Korean Filipino child abandonment. So there were roles even by Sandara Park way before. She performed in Cristala, for example. She's a Korean Filipino child there, and some more. Ryan Bang also in um, Loving in Tandem. Business ownership. So some Ryan Bang, for example, Dasuri Choi performed as business owners. Fandom. Okay, so the theme of fandom where there's a Korean celebrity and there's a Filipino fan, for example, in Korean like Korean Chagya. And tourism. Filipinos wanting to go to Korea to travel and see and because of the very beautiful place and tourist spots, it's a dream come true for most to come to go there. For example, Liza Soberano and my ex and Y's. Okay, we go now to Filipino references in Korean dramas and films. Uh, okay, this is a collage also. I have more data here because I started this longer than jotting down the Philippine references, no, the Korean references in the Philippines. So hopefully we can also learn a lot from at least from what I have jotted down, gathered so far here. Okay, this is arranged from the latest to uh, 2008, should not be there anymore, but anyway. Okay, so Space Sweepers, the most recent one, uh, Golden Holiday. In Space Sweepers, there's a Filipino speaking Tagalog or even performing as a restaurant owner. Golden Holiday, which was aired in Korea last year, was 90% shot in the Philippines. Mon Confiado and a lot of also other Filipino actors were there. Filipino characters were portrayed as corrupt police. One, okay, Mon Confiado. And a key role also by Tambays, who were helping in the operation of the Korean police character, which is the lead in this movie. We have Sunshine Family, as I mentioned before. First Possession, Tagalog was used there. There's a possessed Filipino master. By the way, not because I'm listing all this, it doesn't mean that I've watched every single one of them. Okay, some of them I've watched the scenes only. I also have to watch some of them, okay, but most of them I did. So if you might ask some detailed questions later, I might I hope I won't disappoint you with some of those that would pertain to the storylines of all these listings here. Okay, that's a disclaimer already. Thank you. Bacchus Lady. Okay, here a Korean Filipino was taken care of by a child, so son of a Filipina and of a Korean, uh, uh, taken by a Korean prostitute, because it's about an old female prostitute in Korea. This movie, Bacchus Lady, and there Cherish Maningat, one of the popular also, no, na, she has been featured in some documentaries and news already here in the Philippines. This She has been performing also several roles already in this list. She performed a Filipina who stabbed her Korean husband, who is a doctor and getting imprisoned. And there's also Nash Ang. He's one of our speakers in this forum also. Watch out for him. He'll be discussing, I'm sure, some good uh, knowledge and first-hand information about how it is to be involved in Korean media there in Korea. Okay. No Breathing, Davao as filming location, My Little Hero. We'll talk more about this later. But here, there's a Korean Filipino again looking for his Korean dad, and he joined a singing competition. And Cherish Maningat again performed here, a Filipina mom who wants to bring her son back to the Philippines. Hindsight, filming in Cebu, Taste of Money, uh, uh, a nanny, a Filipina nanny, was uh, performed her here as, and who had an illicit affair with the father of the household she served. And last scenes were shot in the Philippines. Kay John Uchi, Boracay Punch, Yuain Aswanduk, again, a Filipino or Korean Filipino. Tropical Manila, we mentioned this other two, but it's actually before 2010, so we'll move on. In Korean dramas, there's more, but primarily mga minor roles. In Vincenzo, this is very recent. There was a mention of escaping to Cebu. In Mouse, there was also an escaping of a criminal being mentioned, escaping through a boat headed to the Philippines. Romantic Doctor Kim to here. Cherish Maningat is already identified actually as a Filipino by most viewers, but not, of course, of Korean viewers. Probably they are not aware that she's a Filipino. Not all of them would be aware, but Filipinos, because she's more visible on Philippine TV. She was not mentioned as a Filipino mother here, but she's assumed to be Filipino, even if it's not explicitly mentioned. Okay, but yeah, there's no explicit mention there. Chief of Staff, paper company in the Philippines, so corruption, more of an escape route. In Running Mates, there's an investigation of the case of a Filipino who committed suicide after being accused of killing a resto owner. And Nash Ang again performed here as a brother of the deceased to seek truth and justice. We also know about the Where Stars Land or the Fox Bride, where Filipino celebrities performed as a couple. Okay, they had immigration issues. When the Camellia Blooms, there's a mention of a boy traveling in the Philippines. Romance Bono's book, Daughter of the Lead is in the Philippines Studying. Arthur Chronicles. This was also in the news, Nash Ang, using Tausug language here, but he performed as a slave. Forest, Philippines. This is, I think, in two episodes of Forest. This was just 2 years ago. Philippines as a location. Grace Lee was there also in cameo, but she's also a co-producer in this drama. My IDs Kang Nam Beauty, a daughter being sent to the Philippines to study English. Your Pretty Oman book. Here there's also a copy, no? Korean Filipino child. Ghost Seeing Detective Choyong, factory workers. Healer, going to the Philippines to cover a kidnapping of a Korean CEO's daughter. My Love from Another Star, Imelda Marcos. There was a mention of Imelda Marcos in her immense collection of shoes. Okay, so here the recurring roles are Philippines as a collocation of crime, Korean Filipino child abandonment, illegal immigration and other crimes, and blue collar jobs, mostly serving in the construction or performing as a nanny. Okay, tourism, going here for cheaper holiday and vacations. Okay, some of them also for at least in there was no retirement naman, but mostly for vacation. Okay. So here we try to analyze based on the circuit of culture framework. We first start with representation. In representation, there are theories which are saying that the representations may come from reflection of reality. Number two, intention representations made by the authors or the creators or the writers, the producers of the production. Okay, and there's also a constructionist view where meaning is constructed by the result or the product of the at least the representation seen in the final product. But we won't tackle the intentional, just the reflective and the construction approach. Okay, in the reflective, we see that being fans, of course, of at least, for example, of Korean celebrities is very, very real here in the Philippines. I'm even one of them. I've been also in that period where I book flights when it was very cheap back then. I would book a flight to go to Korea to attend the fan meeting and all these. No, so it's reflective of what we can see in the society. Even Korean Filipino children, actually, copy no has been coined. Okay, but it's not technically. There are other terms that are used for Korean Filipino children like Koshans or Korean Asians or children of multicultural families, many other terms. But for this, at least presentation, I've been using Copino because it has also been popularized here in the Philippines. Okay, Copinos, as I said, is reflective also because we have a lot of cases here in the Philippines of Korean Filipino children abandoned by their fathers, unfortunately. Okay, in the tourism theme a while ago, we have a lot of tourist arrivals here in the Philippines, Korean tourist arrivals and Filipino arrivals also in Korea increasing. Okay, and Koreans also coming here not just to study short term but actually also long term. In the news, we can find a lot of this has also been covered by Professor Jean Franco already. A lot of news covering crimes either by Filipinos in Korea or Koreans in the Philippines. Okay. Yeah, there's more. So it's both seen in Korean and Philippine news. Image construction, so what then, so what if there's a reflection in reality, no? But how it's being presented also in the film is emphasizing the view or what at least also is being created at least about the Philippine society in Korean media. For example, in Golden Holiday, uh, these lines were seen, and I think it has been recurring actually in the whole movie. So it was shot primarily in the Philippines, right? So they kept on saying na here in the Philippines, parang you're in the Philippines, you can do anything. Money does all the talking. You can get away with it. So this is the Philippines. They kept on saying that that it's different from Korea, and they can do anything here. They can escape the law from here, not just from Korean law, but even from the Philippine laws. Next in the circuit is identity. Okay, I know that I'm over time, but don't worry, we'll almost be done. Thank you, Professor Michelle Palumbarit, for the extra time that you allowed me to use for this presentation. Anyway, for the identity part, there's the issue of race, okay, and colonial mentality. There's more, but I'll just zoom into this. With the difference, for example, of Korea and the Philippines, when we talk about the race in Korea, it's a different. There's a different dynamic because despite them being multicultural now, there's also a history. Of course, they're more homogeneous in nature. Imagine even with the geography, no, Philippines is what, how many islands, but compared to Korea, we have 7,000 and more than that. But in Korea, there's a lot less, of course, and there's a lot of difference in terms of diversity, and the concept of being at least in a race or in an ethnic group, but uh, will at least just identify, at least for Koreans, they have at least this pure still, no, despite all the, of course, the education, the adjustments, or at least the what has been done by the government also to welcome, at least because their society has been becoming more multicultural. However, it's hard to remove these principles or philosophies, or at least their beliefs, coming from one race. The Tanel Midjok, they even celebrate Gechon Chol. You may look, I have no time to really discuss this, but it's more of um, uh, being mixed in blood is not really good. So in probably in a short, to simplify it, that's one of, it's there's purity in preserving being Korean, at least in race. Okay, but however, as I said, there have been many discussions and already efforts to not exclude um, other nationalities who are already uh, as we can see already in not just in Korea but in the rest of the world. Since Koreans, of course, have of at least for the Philippines, if we're talking about the Philippine case, there's a lot of intermarriages already here in the Philippines and in Korea with Filipino and Koreans. So this has been, for further readings, I really recommend this reading from Professor Jion An of Mixed Race Politics and Neoliberal Multiculturalism in South Korean Media. So there's a lot of um, at least discussion with how the government, the media has been addressing this concern about race and being pure blooded, even the skin color, and how they deal with this, not just in media, but even in education and in government policies. Okay, one particular movie that I also recommend, if you're more, if you're further interested in this topic, is the My Little Hero. Here, there's this Korean Filipino child who's about to perform, but he had to stop because he's performing a Korean role, and he said, "But my skin is dark. I'm not Korean." So it's a very moving part where he's really questioning himself. Am I can I call myself Korean even if my dad abandoned me? So these questions are really also worth the study and the discussion. On the other hand, there's also this issue of colonial mentality. I know um, this is too also encompassing, not to discuss, but to relate this with at least the identity issues that we have in or this is an overlap of the identity and the consumption in the circuit of culture framework, no. When we see Filipinos being starred or at least being featured in Korean films, we see we usually applaud and celebrate these roles, and there's nothing wrong with the good acting and really the great performances. But however, if we look into the roles, what kind of roles do these characters portray really? Will there come a point where Filipinos will be given a role aside from being an illegal immigrant worker, or as I said, yung mga some of those that I've mentioned already. It's not bad to celebrate, of course. This is already my personal comment about this, but we can see here how we've also um, been celebrating other cultures as not just higher, but also probably better than us, okay, in many aspects. For example, there are already many mentions in the comparison of productions also in the Philippines and in Korea. And even here I've included Ryan Bang here in Kusina Kings. He's a villain there, but still he was there promoting, here in this video screenshot. He's promoting a dance move, okay, from the movie, and even if his portrayal is a villain, he's seen as lovable because of even this Korean heart move was more popularized also in at least in this dance move that they made in Ulala Dance for Kusina King promotion. Okay, next is the production. Okay, again, as I mentioned, it was already an overlap from the other topics. Here in the Philippines, we have more. There's a difference with the celebrity culture in the Philippines and in Korea, and also in the quality of the stories or content that we see in films and dramas. In the Philippines, whoever's name is becoming popular and um, um, being commercialized in a way, no, they reprise roles. If they're comedians, then they get comedic roles. There was not me really. It was once asked in a conference that or symposium that I joined. Why do Koreans all only have parang funny roles in? Why are not they're not given more serious roles in Philippine TV? That's because I think when we trace it, no, starting with Sandara as the pambansang krung krung, and her being appreciated with her broken Tagalog, and very cute one at that we usually attribute to her. It has been kind of stuck there. There has been no probably if we see more serious roles, for example, for others who would be given opportunities, yes, we would. But since the comedy part, at least in the celebrity image of these Koreans, that's where the production would always go for. The stories would always revolve around those characters. However, in the difference of, for example, in Korean and Filipino stories, for example, in My Little Hero, it was actually a product of a competition. So um, the movie itself, before it was before the script was, of course, it had to go through a competition against other scripts, and for this to be given the first prize, and it's about a multicultural issue in Korea involving Philippines. It's something that we can also learn from. But I'm not just talking about that. About for quality stories, I'm emphasizing that they have this also this system of competition, so that they would arrive, or at least produce more quality stories. However, in the Philippines, one of our directors even was quoted saying this. He's sorry for the state of Philippine shows, that we're stuck with stereotypes. Again, looking at, yes, there's a reality to it, probably at the sense, but the comparison that we can see uh, would go not just with the stories, but also at least with the other side being better than us. Consumption, we've mentioned this, the fandom, at least in the Philippines. However, for Filipino representations in Korea, here in the Philippines, before the pandemic, we have seen Korean movies being shown in Philippine cinemas already. But in for example, the Divine Fury movie, there's a fan club that even um, organized a premiere showing, a block screening during the premiere. Uh, so that goes to say that with the reception, with the consumption, there's a lot of there's a high level of fandom here in the Philippines. Of course, we would attribute it to a good again as the production trait of quality stories and stars. However, Philippine movies and or dramas have been parang at up to this point still very few have been aired on TV, but mostly we can see Filipino or TV or regular uh, movie houses, but for international film festivals, very recent to actually, last month, yeah, ASEAN Cinema Week, Isa Pa with Feelings was screened. And in Busan Film Festivals also, Filipino directors have been invited over and over again. In terms of regulation, so saying that, so what if we find some concerns in the airing of Philippine or Korean related shows or representations. And in the Philippines, there was once a proposal to limit when it was the height of Korean dramas being shown in Philippine TV. There was a proposal to uh, place a quota, but it did not really happen. However, in Korea, they have the quota, at least in their films, is more for airing more of their local films than the foreign. And also for the human rights issue, oops, the racial discrimination that we have noticed, at least in the representations earlier, there was this paper, a study on the status of racial discrimination in Korean society and the legislation for the elimination of racism, written by the Women Migrants Human Rights Center of Korea and released by the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, which was just, I think, last 2 years ago, 2019. So there's an effort to eliminate. That's quite hard actually, but and complex. But there's in terms of regulation, there's a move by the Korean government to further at least be more balanced in their shows where racism is not really more highlighted. Okay. In conclusion, finally, sorry, it took me already almost an hour. Thank you for listening so far. So we have come to the 72 years of diplomatic relations. There has been so many developments and pains as well between Korea and the Philippines. However, in media, it will just somebody asked me before, do you think up to when would Hallyu be super popular or super gripping, at least for Filipinos? Will it ever fade? Not in the next 10 years, some of my friends would say. And I would probably agree to that. It's not, it's already been a part of our culture. And also us being also part of the Korean society there in Korea, there's 51,136 Filipinos in South Korea as of 2020. Uh, Taking this further, if we look at the um, at Hallyu expanding in the era of transnationalism, that Hallyu is not only confined anymore with Korea and Korean. There have been some talks already. I attended this forum, this conference, I think 2 weeks ago. Yeah, theorizing the Korean wave, where there are questions like this: K-pop without, do you can you imagine K-pop without Koreans? Because it has evolved into an international thing already, or a K culture without K. So these are questions on the Koreanness, but not or at least the exclusivity of Koreanness, but also the expansion and the integration, the relationship, the dynamic um, movements of uh, um, content, culture, performers that we see across the world as Hallyu expands further. To close, this is a personal note. So we've said we're not saying that okay, everything about Filipino is bad in Korean media, or everything about Korea in Filipino media is just funny. Okay, we're not really just boxing that. However, into that, but we're hopefully in this presentation we've documented, at least so far, where is the Philippines, or how has, kasi Hallyu is not just for Koreans. It has been consumed, or it is being consumed by the rest of the world, and how Filipinos are being portrayed also there is, of course, compared to Philippine media. Yes, we have an international footing also, but not as big as Hallyu. Okay, we have to accept that. So the representations are not really as equal in terms of impact. Probably we have very small at least roles, and probably they are just minor ones. But if you accumulate it and you see it over and over again, this is also saying about the image that Korean productions at least have with Filipinos, and Filipinos, and vice versa also with Koreans. And I remember this to close. I remember just this um, scene in let's one of the Let's Eat drama, and a blog. I came across this write up where the in the stress of the lead character, she would often open her drawer and get a choco mucho bar, and the viewer who wrote this online was surprised that a Philippine product was there. And uh, well, at least for the viewer, wow, a Korean product is being presented in a Korean drama, so it's a wow thing for her. But for me, when I encountered this, I was just reminded of how both the Philippines and Korea would, at least despite the complexities, would find comfort in each other. So even with just this representation of a chocolate, um, in the midst of why am I very being emotional suddenly? Sorry. Despite the stress, we can find strength in each other. So hopefully, at least with this forum, in discussing representations, we don't just stop with criticizing or listing also, but also hoping, or at least communicating, probably also, that things would improve and show more of the positive representations and positive relationship, and encouraging at least images both of the Philippines and Korea in their counterpart countries' media presentations. With that, I close, and I thank you also again for the opportunity. I sorry for having this in 1 hour instead of just 30 minutes. I consumed some time for question and answer already. Thank you again to the organizers, and I hope we can address also questions probably properly later during the Q&A. That's it. Salamat po. Hello.
Okay, thank you, Miss Sadorra, for that very informative talk. We learned about the earlier references in Korea in Philippine media, Philippine references and exposure of Korean media, and recurring Filipino themes in Korean films and dramas, and its analysis through representation, image construction, and identity and race production, and how nation stretches Hallyu. Now we will be proceeding on our Q&A portion. We will be reading the questions and the comments and let our speakers answer it. Okay, now for our first question. Okay, so what are the challenges in this cross-culture act of references? Is it rooted on respectful, genuine interest, or the or the hints of exotism, appropriation, and outright racism? So any of our speakers can answer this question.
This is probably my topic, no, Ma'am Michelle. So,
Because I think it's for you.
yeah. Well, to label racism as racism, if we take it at face value, yes, there is not just a hint, but an outright presentation of the Filipino as the lesser race, as seen in blue collar jobs, and the highlights of the ano no the um, at least the criminal acts, okay, and other related issues. But the challenge, of course, is as I mentioned already, the image is not just made to affect also Koreans, but the rest of those who consume Hallyu. So if we're talking about the challenges in cross cultural, at least references, just like what the Korean government actually already acknowledged that by making starting it off with a policy, taking out or eliminating racism in their in media, which will be probably a long fight, but there's a recognition already of the challenge, and hopefully um, uh, more steps will be taken towards an improvement. So in terms of rooted in respectful, genuine interest, uh, as I mentioned, there's an intention by the production. There's also an interpretation in our side, no? When we say genuine, and we ask about the intention of the writers and the producers, I cannot speak for that. But we can only judge based on what we already see as a cultural artifact or product, as I've mentioned a while ago. So hopefully I've answered the question there.
Okay, so for our next question, okay, we do. This is question for Dr. Palumbarit. So said here, good afternoon, Dr. Palumbarit. Thank you for the insightful lecture. You said po that the PH could realize the importance of the culture industry. How far along are we in this process po? What actions have been made in line with the developing the culture industry? Thank you po and
Yeah, you're welcome, Erica. Um, I can't really quantify how long we've come. But if we consider Korea as a standard, say, for example, their Hallyu, the popularity, the global popularity, the revenues, the government support, the business support, I can say that it's still a very long way to go for us. And I think in the Philippines, we are focused on tourism at the moment. That's what I see. We are inviting tourists to come here, and I think there are so many things to learn from from Halyu's experience in this case. So I can say that I can't really quantify it, and it's still a long way to go for us if we consider Hallyu as our standard. Thank you.
okay, so we hope, Erica, that Dr. Palumbarit was able to answer your question. So, now, so let's proceed to the third question. Okay, this is from Corina Medina. Sabi niya, hello po, how long do you think it would take before our K-pop group will be recognized as their own K-pop brand? Attach them as being K-pop inspired. Thank
You do want to answer first, Wino, or shall I answer
Para
it first?
sige po, konti lang. For okay, this is also this is a personal note. This was not actually in my presentation. I'm not into the at least the pop side, no, but more in the drama and the film side. But um, the thing with recognition would depend more, of course, on the reception of first of the Filipinos themselves, and the recognition also probably since it came from the inspiration came from Hallyu or at least Korea. If it would be also recognized there, then there's also that the quantification. Miss Professor also Palumbarit mentioned it a while ago. It's not that easy to really quantify, but it would depend more on how we we also promote it and we consume it in the case of Filipino fans as well.
Okay. As
you.
for
So we hope
Karina's
that
question,
answers your question. So,
yeah, can I answer the
okay, proceed
question?
po.
Yes, thank you.
Okay
I
lang po.
told in thank you in my lecture. I said that Hallyu was not made overnight. So as for P-pop groups to be recognized as our own P-pop brand inspired by K-pop, it will take time really. Um, Again, it would take collaborative efforts between the government, the business, and of course us Filipinos, and also investments in research and development for us to be able to also produce good quality films and good quality music. So it takes time, and it depends on many factors.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Palumbarit. We hope, Karina, that answers your question. Okay, so do we have another question? Okay, so it says here, what are the potential risks of Hallyu in terms of Filipino cultural identity? Knowing that majority of the Filipinos are really into Korean entertainment and its material production. So any of this are from our speakers can answer.
I can answer it
Meron
first.
din
Yeah.
po.
Uh, to borrow what my students write about this in her paper, nilamon ng K-pop, sabi niya. I mean, it's just a joke, but I think if one forgets his or her own Filipino identity and that he or she would just want to be a K-pop idol and become Korean, I think there's a danger to it. And the other thing is if one thinks of Filipino culture as inferior to that of Korean culture, and I think there's a danger to it too, because I always think, and I always believe that there is no culture superior over the other. So if these things happen, then I think it's risky on the part of that person. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm a specimen of this question. I'm a Philippine Studies major, by the way. But I've been studying a lot on K-pop. I already also mentioned in my paper that, or in the discussion that a fan. I've been spending also, and but whenever I'm asked how is your being Filipino affected, it's different to consume and appreciate. There's a difference between that and um, denying your own, that you're a Filipino and you're proud of it. Yes, I acknowledge, for example, that there are complex problems, at least in the production of our own media, for example. But I'm not ashamed of being a Filipino. So if as I agree to what Professor Palumbarit said. So if at least you're intact and aware of your own, then there's the risks are lesser. But if you're if there's an heightened at least awareness that you're inferior, or acceptance, or at least a mindset that you're inferior than the other culture, and that you will never be the same with that, which actually we will never be the same because we're different. No, but at least that one is better than the other, and that you'll be ashamed of your own. That's the key kasi. So then the risk will be greater. Hopefully uh, that taking into account at least the intactness of knowing that you're a Filipino and that you appreciate your own, despite consuming other products. That you would find a balance between that. Hopefully the risk will be also decreased in a way.
Okay, thank you. So we hope our speakers was able to answer your question. So we have another question. Okay, so it says here again from Erica. Good evening, Miss Sadorra. Thank you for the great lecture. With all the Korean-inspired productions flooding Philippine mainstream media, what does the future of the Philippine TV or media look like?
Grabe, pang Miss Universe yung question. But appreciate it, Miss Erica, di ba? Kalukot. Estudyante ko din si Catriona Gray, tsaka yung ibang mga beauty queen. So, parang ganito yung mga questions na tinitrain sa kanila kapag, what is the future of? This is very complex also to address. But, maybe I'll address it in this way. There's a bar, or at least an example set before us, and it's up to us actually to use it to amplify our own qualities, or our own cultural products. And if the future will depend on how, for example, seeing SB19 and the P-pop groups, yes, incorporating being trained by Hallyu inspired, K-pop inspired music and trainers, but at least still insisting or standing on the Filipino. It's a good, there's the future is, at least there's hope that it will not remain at least that the identity will not just be tied to Korea, but also the Korean the reason why we call them inspiration is that it's meant to highlight our own strengths also. So hopefully, again, the conference I attended 2 years ago is about fandom. There's power in fueling or at least supporting these waves through fan groups and supports, of course not hindi, iba pa yung ano no yung regular support of consumers, but yung fandom, that's also a different thing. And if we also begin to appreciate those fans, no, appreciating the Korea and also appreciating our own, then the future will probably be better or hopeful. We can say probably being not just inspired but also driven to strengthen our own products. There. Baka po may madagdag pa si ma'am.
Okay, thank you for that, Miss Sadorra, and we hope for Erica that your question has been answered. So, Dr. Palumbarit, do you want to add something to the question?
Yeah, I think when I answered the question, and I've answered the question enough. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, we're done. Our last question. What is our last question? Okay, so this question is for Dr. Palumbarit. So it says here, what initiative of the Korean government on uplifting their culture industry do you think could the Philippines adapt so the local support for our domestic films or dramas could increase?
This is a very interesting question. What initiative of the Korean government and uplifting do you think could be could the Philippines adapt so that local support for domestic? I think, like, Moon Jae-in and Kim Dae-jung, they have supported culture industries by allocating budget, the government budget for culture industries, and I think the Philippines can learn from that, because if I know that there are a lot of talents here in the Philippines. If they're just supported, really motivated to and encouraged through fundings and support from our government, they can do something, of course. So I think in this regard, it should be a support, a financial support to our artists, to our performers here, and to the rest of the cultural industries here in the Philippines, like what Korean government and is doing until now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Palumbarit. And also thank you to everyone for all your questions. Apologies to those questions that aren't brought up due to our time restriction. And also thank you to our speakers. Now, UP Ariang would like to present our certificate of appreciation to Dr. Michelle Palumbarit and Miss Helweena Sadorra. So first, for Dr. Michelle Palumbarit, we would like to present this certificate of appreciation for imparting our valuable knowledge and insights during the 2021 Philippine-Korean Youth Forum organized by UP Ariang and co-presented by UP Korea Research Center and Pinoy Scholars of Korea. Given this 24th day of April 2021, it's okay. Given this 19th day of April 2021, likewise for Miss Helweena Sadorra, we would also like to present this certificate of appreciation for your time and contribution here at Philippine-Korean Youth Forum, signed by our UP Ariang President Cassandra De La Cruz and UP Ariang Advisor Dr. Kyung Min Bae. We will be sending a copy of the certificate via email and also through mail post. Once again, thank you very much.
Thank you too
Okay,
for
so
this opportunity.
Kamsahamnida.
Okay, so to wrap up, UP Ariang would like to thank our speakers, delegates, and everyone who streamed today's session under the Arts and Media track. PKYF is a week-long event organized by UP Ariang, co-presented by UP Korea Research Center and Pinoy Scholars of Korea, made possible by APOP and JK Network Services in partnership with ADSA Animo Anyong PNU and UP Uyo Muyo, in cooperation with Blue Hanguk Society and FEU International Study Society. Also brought to you by Ateneo Celadon and co-promoted by Korean Cultural Center in the Philippines. So tomorrow we will be having our second day of keynote lectures under the governance and diplomacy track. So make sure to tune in at 5 p.m. on Facebook and on YouTube. Again, I am Madarna and this is Philippine Korea Youth Forum, hashtag transcending borders.